hoping it works because streaming from home when the weather great. It's a challenge. But well, oh hey, yes, we're live. All right, hi YouTube, how are y'all? I'm going to give all of you, Urban View and YouTube, the same reminder. Your sister friend is dealing with a serious dental emergency, and in fact, we are going to be at around 11:17. I will be heading out to my surgeon or my dental person or whatever you call the people who do the amazing work of making your teeth pain go away. It's been a really challenging morning. So if you hear me talking a little weirdly, it's because I'm trying to take care of that. But having said all of that, we got a lot to get into today because it's another day ending in Y. Now, earlier this morning, we spoke about what took place yesterday when it came to South African President Cyril Ramaphosa literally meeting the face of white American Christian nationalism. And that meeting between he and Donald Trump is something that I discussed really extensively in today's podcast episode. Those of you in Urban View, you heard a bit of a snapshot of it, but those of you in the YouTube space, if today's podcast episode, Lurie breaks it down, we talk really extensively about that meeting yesterday, what it means internationally for those of us who are of African descent. And we talk a little bit about what I'm about to introduce to you this morning, which is the end of consent decrees. The end of consent decrees. Now, y'all know that in my real life, I'm trained as an attorney. I run a law center and I do the work of trying to figure out how to use the law to make people's lives better. Like that's literally our community's lives better. That's literally all I do. After these airwaves, before these airwaves, my focus is how to use the law to make our lives better. And what we learned as a result of exposure to the protests that came out in the aftermath of Trayvon Martin, of Mike Brown, of Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, George Floyd, what we learned was that a lot of the policing practices that led to the assassination of these names and so many more, countless others who I've forgotten more hashtag names than I can remember, just to keep it 100. But what we learned is that it's not just about the protest that takes place in the aftermath. It's also about the legal response from the federal government that can play a really significant role in minimizing the harms that police officers who are part of bad police precincts can inflict upon our community. Now, I got to be honest with you. Y'all know I'm petty. And as I've said many, many times, I've always been a petty person. I told you so is my fluent language. It's like my first language was I told you so. And so it's hard for me in this story to not be snarky and be like, I told you this was going to happen. This is why y'all should have came out to vote. Or I told you this was going to happen. This is why that woman not being black enough for you wasn't a big enough of an issue. Should not have kept you out the voting booth. But snark does not always work. And I think really what we also have in this moment, as I'm about to explain to you what's happening right now with these consent decrees, is a real opportunity for us to think about what civic engagement actually means. Because when police are able to kill you and walk in the blood that pools around your body and get away with it scot-free, you'll realize, I think, as a result of this conversation, just how significant elections really do matter. Because everything I'm about to describe for you was a part of the campaign. The decision that the Department of Justice just announced yesterday to abandon consent decrees was a part of the presidential campaign, and people either didn't know it, didn't realize it, or didn't think it was real. And now we're going to see what the FAFO looks like for all of us. On Wednesday, the Justice Department issued an announcement that they are dropping their police accountability agreements with Minneapolis and Louisville. Interesting, because Minneapolis is where we saw not just George Floyd, but oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of the young man who was driving, who was shot by a female officer who claimed that she thought she was pulling her taser and she actually pulled her gun, which was the taser is on one side, the gun's on the other side. She pulls the wrong one and shoots this little boy while he's driving. Minneapolis has had a lot of these challenges. And when the police department or when the Justice Department announced yesterday that they were abandoning consent decrees for Minneapolis and Louisville, it was really not a shock, but it was really troublesome because Louisville is where we saw what happened to Breonna Taylor, when she and her beloved, who were trying to go to sleep in their own bed, end up hearing a knock at the door. And at the end of that interaction, she is unalived, murdered by the police. Consent decrees are judicial orders. They're judicial orders that basically say there is a lot of reform needed. There's a lot of changes that need to happen. And we can't trust you, the entity that needs to be changed. We can't trust you to actually change it. So we are going to instead issue a judicial order, a mandate that says, here's a study of all the terrible things you've done, all the systematic patterns and practices that you have engaged in that create a violation against Black people and or whomever. And over here is the order that we think will help to rectify that. Here's the list of changes that we need you to make that are going to make it so that your police officers are not killing Black people simply because they dare to be Black and breathe through Black nostrils. Consent decrees are judicial orders that basically have been where a court has been presented with a ton of information, evidence-based information, findings that become a part of the evidentiary body of information that a judge and a jury have to look at. And then that allows the judge to say, hey man, y'all are terrible at equitable policing. You are terrible at not being racist ass Klan acting, slave patrolling type of police officers. And so they will create these consent decrees. The Department of Justice is typically the agency at the federal level that will go before a court and say, listen, we're a part of law enforcement. You're a part of law enforcement. This police precinct is a part of law enforcement, and they are terrible at what they're doing. So we, as a law enforcement community, are going to enter into a consent decree. We, the Department of Justice, and I'm really simplifying here, but I want you all to understand what's at risk and what's happening. We, the Department of Justice, are going to file charges against this police precinct. Law enforcement against law enforcement, because the law enforcement that they doing is terrible. And it violates the Constitution. It violates civil rights. And so they have to be placed under a judicial order so that they will not continue to do this to Black people or Latino people, whomever the precinct was aimed against. And don't hit me with the why you always do Black and brown, because Latino people get arrested because half of them look Black, because half of them have the same racial composition that the rest of us do. They Black, they white, and they got a little bit of Indian in their family, just like the rest of us, because the slavery that was happening here was the slavery that was happening in Latin America. And in fact, 95% of the enslaved Africans who were snatched out of the continent of Africa didn't even come to these United States. They went to Spanish and Portuguese and French-speaking countries, which means the Pan-African diaspora. Habla español y francés. How do you say French in Spanish? I can't remember. You know what I'm saying. The point I'm making is this. Consent decrees are very, very important, because while the protests matter, while going to the police precinct council meetings matter, while meeting with the community officers matter, without the strength and the teeth of a court order with a federal mandate and an oversight and a monitor, it can be really hard to make reform in policing actually stick. And what we learned yesterday was that the Department of Justice was like, what we are not going to do is fight for justice. I, Pamela Blondy, who am she's supposed to be the Attorney General. Her name is Pam Blondy, whatever you want to call her. She's a blonde bombshell for justice. And by that, I mean she is bombing against justice. And she basically is a mouthpiece for the Trump administration. She is now in charge of our legal system. And the legal system announced yesterday that they are dropping those police accountability agreements, those consent decrees with Minneapolis and Louisville, in addition to a number of other locations. Harmeet K. Dillon. Harmeet, you should know this sister's name. She's not a us sister, but she's a woman. Harmeet K. Dillon now leads the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Now, I know some folks who went to law school with her. Harmeet always been evil, according to the reports, according to the rumor mill in the legal community. This is a woman who ain't never found a civil rights law that she actually liked. She is of herself of Indian descent, as I understand it, if the reports are correct. And she ain't never found a piece of civil rights legislation that she actually liked. And apparently this is who she always been. So we ain't gonna see no miraculous coming to Jesus on the road to Damascus for this one. She is doing the job that she has been primed to do, and that job is to do a whole lot of evil. But basically, she added to the commentary on the announcement yesterday and said that the government is going to be closing, quote, Biden-era investigations of multiple other local police departments. So in addition to abandoning the consent decrees with Minneapolis and Louisville, they are also abandoning other investigations of other police departments, which had not yet gotten to the point of having a consent decree because they were still in the investigation process. That includes in Phoenix, Memphis, and Oklahoma City. Memphis, isn't that where they just lynched Tyree Nichols? Where them Black overseers lynched Tyree Nichols? Isn't that just where that happened? Right. So think about all the investigations that were currently in place, that we're looking to establish the facts that were going to make up the patterns and the practices that these police precincts were systematically engaging in. Those investigations are now done. Those investigations are now done. They are backing away from broader federal oversight of police. And again, this is right before the 5-year anniversary of George Floyd's lynching. And Dillon says, I was not confident that the Justice Department could stand up and justify these in court. Girl, what the hell? What? You've got concrete. That's why you have findings and you do an investigation and then you work with the judicial system to create the types of reforms, unless you believe that slave patrol policing is actually the type of policing that we should have. Now, leaders in the cities that I mentioned, Minneapolis and Louisville, they said that they're going to continue moving forward with implementing the changes that were recommended as a result of the consent decrees. But that depends on local leadership. And if you are in a community where the local leadership is not willing to still enforce these consent decree changes, what you're going to experience is a policing reality that is going to look like, it's going to make George Floyd, it's going to make Breonna Taylor, it's going to make Sandra Bland look like child's play. And remember what Project 2025 told us? That they wanted to give police full immunity. Full immunity this is how we get to full immunity. You get rid of the consent decrees and the orders that say, we have determined you are a bad actor. And as a result of that, you are now mandated to do better. And we're going to be monitoring you. There will be punishment if you fail. That's how you create full police immunity. You get rid of the consent decrees. You get rid of the investigations. And you basically say, you slave patrolling police officers, we want you to catch as many N-words as you possibly can. Yeehaw! It's time for you to go catch another one, because we're not going to care how you do it. Now, the snarky part of me, as I mentioned at the very beginning, would like to say, I told you this was going to happen. And frankly, I just said it. So technically, my snarky pettiness got to exist. But this is also a lesson in civics, because a lot of people went into the voting booth. If they left the couch, they went into the voting booth and they were picking between two options. And when you're in the voting booth and you're picking between two options, the two options you have are the answers to the following questions. Which of these candidates that is here on this ballot, not the candidate I wish we had, not the candidate who went to my church, who I think would be better, if they not on this ballot, they not a part, they a non-motherfucking factor. To quote, what's the woman's name? Evelyn, thank you, Amina. Evelyn Lazada, non-motherfucking factor. If they're not on the ballot and you wanted them to be there, guess what? Try it again the next election. Because when you go into the voting booth, it's not that you come out thinking that we are going to experience like voting experience and then come out and bow to each other like we are in Wakanda forever. That's not what it is. You go into the voting booth to ask who's going to help us the most or hurt us the least. And then you make a decision. And this issue of the consent decrees and of policing immunity, these were on the ballot. So when Donald Trump said he wanted to give full immunity to police, that was a choice on the ballot. When Kamala Harris was on the ballot and she said that as a former prosecutor who was considered a progressive prosecutor before we were even using that term, when she was creating programs to end truancy and to end recidivism, and a lot of y'all believe the okie dokie coverage of those programs and policies, they were actually really good programs and policies that frankly progressive prosecutors are using to this day to minimize the number of people who are negatively impacted by the criminal legal system. This issue was on the ballot. And so when you came out of the ballot, you didn't have anybody on the ballot who was saying we're going to defund the police and we're going to put all the resources that we put usually into over policing, into providing social services such that the need for police is no longer there. No, that was not an option. The option was full police immunity and the end of consent decrees, which they told you they was going to do, or somebody who was, yes, a part of law enforcement, so technically a part of the feds, but once you're the president, you're going to be part of the feds anyway. An option that was going to say we are going to create community policing. We're going to enforce consent decrees and increase the resources that we have for investigating. That was on the ballot. And so a lot of people went to the ballot box to be stimulated or titillated or excited. If you need to be stimulated, titillated, or excited, I'm going to need you to get a lover or get you a rabbit, a little toy, something that can handle that, because the ballot box is where we are cold, we are calculated, and we are ruthlessly analytical in what outcomes will result depending on which of these candidates win. We're in a moment right now where these people are not playing at all. They are going back, not just to Project 2025, they're doing Project 1825, because that's the reality that they plan to bring back. They are abandoning consent decrees. They're going to be giving police full immunity. Last night, they just passed that bitch ass, awful, devilish bill from the pit of freaking hell that is going to make people's economic realities so much worse. It will make Reaganomics look like child's play. And what happens when people don't have their needs met? Oh, they engage in criminality because getting your needs met is not an option. And what happens when they engage in criminality in a world where there is full police immunity? They will be arrested. And once they are arrested, tried, and convicted, the provisions of the 13th Amendment will kick in, and they can then be what? Ding, 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 enslaved and be forced to work in the fields that they just got cleared because the migrants and the undocumented workers who used to be there are no longer there. This was all on the ballot. This was all at stake. We told you. There's my petty again, but we did indeed tell you. And now we're all going to get to find out together. We got to head to commercial break. On the other side of it, we'll be slipping into our Flower to the People segment so that we can elevate just a little bit more. Much more to come on the Lurie Daniel Favors Show. We'll be right back after this.